bizarrely, I went to talk to Geoff Cooke about it only about a year and a half ago, because I'd never asked him, because I was thinking he was going to say something like, you had all these qualities I could see in you and this, that and the other. And he said, well, it was our last roll of the dice. And he was just laughing. And I was just like, great. I was asked something recently that sounded simple at first. Who were the 5 people in rugby I loved the most? I laughed because asking me for the 5 best would probably be easier. You can argue about the best. You can talk about pace, strength, skill matches, all of that. But the people you loved being around, that's different. That's personal. I spent a large part of my life surrounded by rugby players. Some were loud, some hardly said a word, some could make you want to strangle them on Monday and have you laughing with them by Tuesday. And when I think back now, strangely enough, the matches aren't always the first things I remember. I remember dressing rooms, I remember sitting on buses with tired bodies and terrible conversation. I remember hotel breakfasts when nobody looked particularly happy to be awake. I remember the few minutes before a match when suddenly all the joking stopped. I became England captain very young, and people sometimes forget what that actually felt like. I was supposed to lead men who had been around far longer than I had. There were certainly mornings when I looked around that room and thought, why on earth are these blokes listening to me? I didn't always know what I was doing, but I had good people around me. That mattered enormously. Some challenged me, some calmed me down, some made difficult days easier simply because they were there. And one man believed in me at a time when I was probably still learning to believe in myself. Years later, those are the things you remember. Not who got his name in the newspaper, not who received the loudest cheer. You remember the people you were pleased to see when you walked through the door. So when I really thought about that question, 5 names didn't take very long to come to me. And the first was Brian Moore. Brian could be an absolute pain in the backside. I mean that affectionately, well, mostly affectionately, if Brian thought you were wrong, he wasn't going to sit quietly and let you discover it for yourself. He'd tell you, usually immediately. And being captain didn't protect me from that. Actually, it probably made things worse. When you're young and you've been given responsibility, there's a temptation to think leadership means having the answer to everything. Brian was quite useful at reminding me that we disagreed plenty of times. Sometimes I'd walk away from a conversation with him thinking, God, that man is exhausting. Then 10 minutes later, he'd say something ridiculous and the whole room would be laughing. That was Brian. What I came to appreciate was that there was never much pretending with him. You knew where you stood. In a dressing room, that's incredibly valuable. You spend so much time together that eventually people can't hide who they are anyway. Training sessions, buses, hotels, meals, hours, sitting around waiting for something to happen. Brian was Brian through all of it. And beneath all the noise was someone who cared enormously about the team, about the people in it, about doing things properly. As captain, I didn't need 15 men agreeing with me every day. I needed men who cared enough to challenge me when they believed I was getting something wrong. Brian certainly did that. When I think of him now, I don't immediately see one particular match. I hear him, I can almost hear some argument starting in the corner of the dressing room. I can hear someone telling him to shut up, and I can hear the laughter that usually followed. Every good team needs somebody like that. Although I'm not sure every good team could survive 2 of them. Jeremy was different from Brian. Much quieter, in his own way, much smoother, and annoyingly gifted. There were training sessions when the rest of us looked as though we were working terribly hard and Jeremy would do something beautiful without appearing to make any effort at all. You'd look at him and think, could you at least pretend this is difficult? That was Gus. People naturally remember the way he played. I understand that. But when you've shared dressing rooms and hotels with somebody for years, you stop looking at him the way people in the stands do. You get to know the man. I carried things quite heavily at times. Being captain meant I was always thinking about something. The team, the press, what needed saying, what shouldn't be said, whether I'd handled something properly. Jeremy wasn't like that around me. There was an ease about him that I appreciated. Sometimes before a big match, you don't need somebody reminding you how important everything is. You already know You need someone behaving normally, someone having a cup of tea, someone making an ordinary comment about something completely unrelated to rugby. Gus was good for that. After enough years together, you also develop an understanding that doesn't require much conversation. A look can be enough. You know when somebody's comfortable. You know when he's irritated. You know when he'd rather be left alone. Those little things become part of being teammates. And they're the things nobody watching from the stands ever really sees. When I think about Jeremy now, of course, I remember what he could do with a rugby ball. But I also remember all those hours when there wasn't a rugby ball anywhere near us. That's the Jeremy I knew. Not simply the wonderful player everyone watched on Saturday, just Gus. And I was very fond of him. With Rob, the word that comes to mind is trust. It really is as simple as that. When you're captain, especially when you're young, you quickly discover that you can't control everything. You can talk all week, you can prepare, you can make decisions, but once you're out there, you need people around you who understand what's happening without needing everything explained. Rob was one of those people for me. He wasn't somebody who needed to make a great show of himself. He didn't need to tell everyone how important he was. He was just there. And I knew what I was getting from him. There were moments when a match became uncomfortable, when the noise seemed to get louder and everything started happening a little too quickly. I'd look across and see Rob, and there was something reassuring about it. He wasn't panicking, so there was no reason for me to panic either. We spent enough time together that eventually you learn someone's moods as well. You know when to speak. You know when not to. You know when somebody wants a conversation and when he'd much rather sit there quietly. That sort of understanding takes years. People often think rugby relationships are built during the 80 minutes everyone watches. They're not. They're built during all the other hours. The training sessions when you're exhausted, the meals, the travelling, sitting around hotels, the conversations after things have gone badly. Rob and I had plenty of those years together. And the older I've become, the more I've appreciated how rare that kind of trust actually is. I played with many talented men, but talent isn't quite the same as knowing that when things become difficult, you can look beside you and feel better because a particular person is there. Rob gave me that feeling, and I never forgot it. Geoff was different, of course. He wasn't standing beside me when the whistle went. He wasn't making tackles or getting dragged into the bottom of a ruck. But I don't think I could talk about those years without talking about him. I was 22 when I became England captain. 22. When I say it now, it sounds ridiculous. I probably look confident enough from the outside. Young men are quite good at that. You walk into a room as though you know exactly what you're doing and hope nobody notices that you're working half of it out as you go along. Geoff knew. I think that was one of his great qualities. He didn't try to control every decision I made. He didn't constantly stand over my shoulder telling me how a captain was supposed to behave. He gave me room. Sometimes I'd go to him with something bothering me, expecting a long answer. Often I didn't get one. We'd talk for a while, he'd ask a question or two, then he'd leave me to make up my own mind. At the time, I probably didn't appreciate how clever that was. I don't know. There is a difference between giving someone responsibility and genuinely trusting them with it. Geoff trusted me. That didn't mean he always agreed with me. I'm sure there were moments when I tested his patience considerably, but I never felt he was waiting for me to fail. For a young captain, that mattered more than I could possibly have understood then. You remember people differently as you get older. With Geoff, I don't think first about team talks or tactics. I think about belief. He gave a very young man the feeling that he belonged in a position he was still learning how to occupy. I owe him a great deal for that. And then there was Diano. There really wasn't another one quite like him. You could put Dean in almost any situation and somehow he remained Dean. Big match, ordinary training session, miserable weather, dressing room, full of nerves. It didn't seem to make much difference. I loved that about him. When you're captain, you spend a lot of time looking around at people. Sometimes you're not even aware you're doing it. You're trying to judge the mood. Who's nervous? Who needs a word? Who needs to be left alone? With Diano, I rarely worried. I'd look across the dressing room and there he was, usually looking as though this was all perfectly normal. that could settle you. Dean also had that wonderful quality where he never seemed interested in becoming somebody else just because people were watching. There was no performance. What you saw was what you got. And when you've spent years around someone, that becomes incredibly important. You see each other tired, irritated, injured, disappointed. You see each other after wonderful afternoons and after days when nobody particularly wants to talk. Eventually there's nowhere to hide. That's when you discover who you genuinely enjoy having beside you. I always enjoyed having Diano there. There were plenty of brilliant rugby players during those years. I could sit here all afternoon naming them. But this was never supposed to be a list of the greatest. For me, it was about affection. It was about the people who became part of everyday life and somehow remained part of your memories long after that life disappeared. When I think of Diano, I can still picture him sitting in the dressing room. I can still imagine the conversations. I can still hear the laughter. That's why he is here. Not because I need to tell anyone how good Dean Richards was, simply because when I remember those years, Diano is always somewhere in the room. The funny thing about getting older is that the rugby itself becomes quieter in your memory. When you're playing, everything feels enormous. The result matters. The next match matters. What the newspapers are saying matters far more than you'd ever admit. Then the years pass. And somehow those things begin to lose their sharp edges. What stays are the people. When I think about Brian, I think about honesty. I think about arguments, noise, and usually laughter somewhere at the end of it. When I think about Gus, I remember that wonderful ease he had, not just with a rugby ball, but around the people who knew him well. Rob makes me think about trust. Geoff makes me think about belief, particularly the belief he showed in a young captain who was still trying to work out what leadership actually meant. And Diano makes me smile. There are many other names I could have chosen. That's the problem with making a list like this. Someone will always say, what about him? And they'll probably be right, but these weren't supposed to be the 5 greatest people I ever encountered in rugby. They were simply 5 people who meant something to me. That's different. If you gave me the chance now to go back for one afternoon, I don't think I'd ask for another final. I wouldn't ask to lift another trophy. I'd probably choose an old dressing room. Nothing special. A few chairs. Some tea. Someone complaining about something completely unimportant. Brian talking too much. Gus sitting there looking far too relaxed. Rob somewhere nearby. Geoff watching all of us and probably wondering how he ever put up with it. And Diano being Diano, I'd sit there and listen. Because when all the matches are finished, those ordinary moments don't feel ordinary anymore. They become the things you'd give almost anything to experience one more time.